I am an occupational therapist. I'm also a certified driving rehabilitation specialist. I'll explain more about what that means later. And I'm a licensed driver instructor in Minnesota. I spend about half of my time here at the Neuroscience Center doing rehabilitation for stroke, brain injury, spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, all those different diagnoses there and more. And of course, all of them do have driving affected or likely affected. So I kind of work with driving with my typical populations, but I do also work with just driving screening as well. So people will send a referral to us and I will see them just specifically about driving. We do safety screening here in the clinic, and then I also will do behind the wheel evaluations and training on adaptive equipment if need be. I'll explain more about our process later. So first we're going to learn about the skills of safe driving, because I want to make sure we understand what the basics are before we explore rationale for stopping driving if we need to. We'll also talk about minimizing risk in case there are some changes in skills. How do we test driving safety? And then how do we talk about and plan for driving retirement? So first we'll talk about the skills. Let's talk about physical first. So obviously when you have cognitive changes, physical impairments may not be going on necessarily, but it's something to watch out for. As we get older and our cognition changes, so can physical changes. So I look specifically at the right foot and ankle, the coordination, strength, sensation. Can you move your right foot from the gas to the brake and back without looking? Are you likely to accidentally press both pedals at the same time? I see that happen sometimes, and we just have to figure out, is it a physical thing or is it more of a cognitive attention kind of thing? We'll go into that more. Can you use both arms and hands appropriately for steering, using the turn signal, other controls? How's your posture? Can you see over the steering wheel? Is your car set up appropriately for what your needs are? Can you turn your neck or your back to see your blind spots? I also think about not just driving, but how do you get yourself in and out of the car? How do you get to and from the building? Is that safe? Can you get your stuff in and out of the car? A lot of people think, well, I can drive a car. Well, it's fine. Well, but then what if you're at risk of falling when you're in the parking lot? So we just like to make sure we're keeping track of all that. A big one is opening and closing the door too. A loss of balance can happen there. I don't just think about the driving skills, but actually mobility around the car as well. All right, let's switch to vision. Obviously, if you're seeing double or you have blurriness, that's a problem. So making sure you can see an eye doctor soon. Do you have a visual field cut or spots in one or both eyes? Some people, after they've had a stroke or a brain injury, can have a field cut. So if you haven't heard of that for yourself, it's probably not going on. But again, good to see an eye doctor regularly to make sure nothing's weird going on. Can you tell how far away things are, or how fast they're coming towards you? That's depth perception, of course. And sometimes it's harder at night, for example, being able to see how fast things are coming at you when all you have are lights to go by. Good to know what your possible limitations are. Can you see in the rain or after dark, or do you need brighter light? That's contrast sensitivity. So does your brain do well with slight variations in color or light and dark, or do you need really stark contrast to be able to see well? Can your eyes move quickly to scan around you? Some of my folks, for example, with Parkinson's disease will have a harder time with their eyes moving quickly. So I'm always watching to see how people are scanning their eyes, if they're looking around a lot, or if they tend to just be straight forward. And I do see that sometimes when I drive with them, just looking straight ahead, not necessarily scanning for pedestrians and things to be aware of. Can you find things quickly when you look at a busy shelf or a drawer? I know that seems kind of silly, but sometimes people will just have a hard time with visual clutter and their brain doesn't know how to filter it out. And when you drive, obviously our brain has to filter out very quickly the things that are not so important for us to focus on, but then attend again if it does become something dangerous that we need to react to. In Minnesota, the rules for driving with vision is you have to have at least 105 degrees of peripheral vision and 20/40 or better acuity with your corrective lenses on. That's kind of the bare minimum to be able to drive without real restrictions. But thinking about if you only have 105 degrees of peripheral vision, you would be basically having to compensate by being extra attentive to the areas that you might not be able to see automatically. So if you have visual changes, or physical for that matter, you have to be able to compensate with cognitive changes. So, thinking skills, as we've been set up to do today. Memory, obviously important for remembering the rules, your navigation, where to turn next, what the speed limit was, other signs. You have to remember things quickly and for sometimes short periods of time, but you have to be able to remember them based on what signs you see. Your thinking speed, obviously, you have to be able to process things very quickly when you're driving, especially at higher speeds. Quickly switching your attention among many things and filtering out what's not important. So being able to, notice up ahead there's a light that's possibly going to change. Oh, there's a pedestrian. They look like they might go out in front of me. Let's see, I've got someone right behind me. They're kind of on my bumper, but the speed limit's 35. Okay, well, I'm going the speed limit. We're following flow of traffic. Just a lot of thinking back and forth between things. Knowing your limits, insight, self-awareness, that's a cognitive ability. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Being able to express yourself and understand others. With certain types of cognitive changes, you might have an issue with communication. And you can work with a speech therapist on that, but overall, it is really important to be able to connect with another driver if, let's say, you're not at fault, but they ran into you and you have an accident and you need to exchange information or advocate to make sure you get their information. Don't want to be a vulnerable person in that situation. Compensating for any hearing loss or sensory loss. Again, if you're missing some of your visual field, or let's say you have really poor hearing, you have to be really attentive and watching out a lot more to make sure you're not, blocking the way of ambulances or things like that. And then anticipating, planning ahead, problem solving. These are all what we call executive functioning skills, where you're kind of putting all this together and thinking, how do I move forward with this situation I'm in? Again, you're doing this quickly on a second by second, millisecond by millisecond basis when you're driving. Judgment is another one. So being able to judge what's safe. Should I turn into this lane yet, or should I wait till this person goes by me? Should I be in the left lane of traffic? Maybe I should be in the right lane because these people are going really fast. Just thinking about those things. All right, other skills I want to bring up. Managing your emotions. It can be hard when you're really stressed out or really frustrated to be able to control that. And when you have cognitive changes, that can be even more difficult. So knowing how to kind of self-regulate is important. And another big one is being able to manage your medical needs. I have a little picture of insulin here because diabetes is a big one that I think a lot of people are not as aware of how it can affect your driving. Low blood sugar, of course, can make you pass out. That's really dangerous. But so is high blood pressure, or high blood sugar. Sorry, you need to be able to know where your blood sugar is at to know that you are safe to drive and that you're not going to be dipping all of a sudden or going up really fast in your blood sugar readings. Also, just taking your medication on time, making sure that your body has that chemistry that it needs to function. So, if you do have some of these skill changes, how do we minimize risk? Well, one of the biggest ones is just adjusting your routine. So, sticking to familiar routes that you don't need GPS for, because that would require listening or seeing something on a device. And also, when you're having to navigate, that's taking away your attention from other things that you need to be focusing on. So I recommend sticking to familiar places that you don't have to think about. Daylight, fair weather, so that you're not dealing with a lot of, you know, uh, contrast sensitivity issues when everything looks gray or things are really dark, or the worst is driving after dark in the rain. And I'm 37 and I feel that way. So there you go. Avoiding rush hour, just because there are people out there that are going to be more just frustrated and making things more dangerous for the rest of us. Avoiding rush hour is always good. Avoiding the freeway or complex interchanges. So I'm talking about those places where you have to make a really quick lane change in order to get a spot to go the direction you need to go in. Clover leaves are an example. I've seen some weird intersections lately where there will be multiple streets coming in, not just across here, but there will be other ones, and you have to know, okay, was that light for me or is that for them? Avoiding distractions, of course. So not eating, drinking, conversation, radio, but sightseeing is another one. I go out driving with people and they'll really like to point out things to me in their neighborhood so that I kind of know what their history is. And I say, oh, no sightseeing. We're just going to focus on the road. Because when you're looking way over here, you're not noticing what's going on in front. So knowing your limits, asking others to drive, if you're, if you had a little alcohol, it affects us differently. Know your limits. If you haven't slept well, if you're in a lot of pain, if you're struggling with brain fog or you're feeling distracted, all these things can be distractions basically. And then use strategies to calm yourself if you're feeling those intense feelings that can be distracting. Here's one of my favorite things. This is a visual of diaphragmatic breathing. So using your belly muscles, when you breathe out, I want you to squeeze your belly in toward your spine. So you're breathing everything out. Imagine your lungs are in your belly. And then when you breathe in, make your belly expand. So it helps to have a hand on the belly there so you know what you're doing. I like to point out that you can take a defensive driving course. In Minnesota, you can get a 10% discount for taking these. Just check with your auto insurance to make sure they don't require certain ones. Some examples are National Safety Council. They have a lot of options on their website. AAA, AARP, a lot of community education course catalogs have a few options in there, and usually those are run by someone from AAA or things like that. So find a good defensive driving course that you can learn some new tips and tricks for defensive driving. So let's talk about some questions. What if you do have a hard time managing diabetes? Check your blood sugar, make sure that you're in a safe range before you drive. And if you do have a hard time with managing it, don't stop asking questions of doctors or ask for a certified diabetes educator. There's a lot of information out there that isn't just given easily to just everybody. So just don't always ask for more information if you feel like you could have better control, okay? What if we are with someone who doesn't limit themselves? So let's say you're a caregiver and you have someone that you are partnered with or something like that, and they think nothing's wrong. This is called anosognosia, so not having insight into their limitations, they're minimizing or blaming errors on others. So it could be that a doctor can let the driver and vehicle services know that they have a patient that's not medically safe to drive. All that is they just send in a letter to the state driver and vehicle services saying, hey, this is my patient, and I don't think they should be driving right now. What will happen is the driver and vehicle services will cancel that license. But it can be undone if someone can prove that they can safely drive. I have that happen a lot, where a doctor will preemptively cancel a license, but then we'll do some training and be like, or do some testing and find out, okay, she's okay within these restrictions, and then they'll reinstate the license. Sometimes they will just send people to people like me for more of an assessment before they decide what to do. And just so you know, anybody can make an anonymous report, and it is anonymous. That is a link there. If you, I think, just search Minnesota driver risky, something like that, I bet it'll come up. You can write a letter or fill out a report about a driver that you're concerned about. When the Driver and Vehicle Services gets that, they will send a letter to that person it's about, asking them to come in for an interview. The person that interviews them works at the Driver and Vehicle Services, is an evaluation specialist. And so they will talk to them and kind of get a feel for if there seems to be a cognitive issue, maybe a physical issue, and they may decide that they just need a letter from the doctor to reinstate the license. I've also seen it where they require a vision report from an optometrist. They might also require redoing the written test and or the skills test at the DMV. So the exact test that, teenagers can do, the person would also have to redo. It kind of depends on how that person presents to the Driver and Vehicle Services in their interview. So then how do we test for safe skills? I'm a certified driver rehabilitation specialist, and I'm certified through ADED. That is an old acronym, but I can't remember what it stood for. But now it's basically the Association for Driver Rehab Specialists. We provide driver rehab services for people with disabilities. We have to have at least 832 hours of experience with driver assessment and training, and then we have to take an exam. And in Minnesota, if we're going out driving with people, we also have to be a licensed driver instructor. So that is what I am too. In the Twin Cities, places that have certified driver rehabilitation specialists are our program, Regions Driving Program. Courage Kenny Rehab Institute also has them. Adaptive Experts is another one. And then I believe the Veteran Association also, the VA also has it. Our process here at Regions Driving Program is first we do a clinical appointment. So we bill insurance for that as an occupational therapy evaluation. We do a bunch of different tests that look at your basic skills like vision, your memory, your thinking speed, planning ahead, noticing things, multiple things at a time, your brake pedal reaction time. We have a simulator, but we only spend about 5 minutes on it. Again, it's just to kind of get an idea of what possible things might be red flags in terms of health for driving. So possible outcomes for that appointment are, okay, yep, you did great on everything, go back to driving. We may say, it's a good idea to follow these restrictions just to minimize your risk. We may say we need to move on to a behind the wheel evaluation because the test results with our screen was just not enough to prove, but you're likely to do okay in a real car. We might also say you're not ready to drive yet. You have to do some, certain things first, like maybe renew your license, or maybe you've had let's say it's been a stroke and you need some more therapy first. Or we might have to say that it's time to retire from driving, and we don't take that lightly. We really know how important this is for independence. And as occupational therapists, we want people to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. So it's a hard thing to know when exactly is that time to stop driving. I don't want people to stop driving way too soon because then you become more isolated. Maybe that's a huge part of your mental health too, to have that ability to be spontaneous and go somewhere. But then we also have to think about safety. So it's kind of balancing those two and making sure that we're not driving so long that it becomes too risky. The behind the wheel evaluation then, it does cost $325 through our program. Currently, we don't know what's going to happen with that in the future. It's not covered by insurance, health insurance or auto insurance. We come to your home currently to see if you drive in your familiar area, because we really feel strongly that people do well when they're in their functional environment. We don't want people to feel so stressed and nervous because they don't want to drive right in the downtown St. Paul area. So we get it. If you're within about 30 minutes from us, give or take a little bit. So we'll go out as far as New Richmond, Hudson. We've been down to Lakeville, Farmington. I've been as far west as, I think, Mound, or we'll go up to Forest Lake. You have to drive in our car, though, and that's by state law. We have to have a brake on our side to legally be a driver instructor program. And we also have to have a rear view mirror on our side so we can see what's going on. We'll make sure that you get used to our car though in like a church parking lot or somewhere before we get on onto the road. So then what's the difference between our program's testing and just going to the DMV? The DMV basically assumes that someone has the cognitive, physical, and vision skills that are expected. So an overall healthy person, um, really kind of geared toward those younger drivers that just want to get their license for the first time. So they don't have a brake. They're in the client's car. That puts them at risk. We have a vehicle with our passenger brake, student driver sign, passenger rear view mirror. So we're ready too with information about the person's strengths and limitations. It's definitely helpful to know if someone tends to be tends to like distract themselves, and so that I can be ready to give them feedback. Or I know that they got lost one day going to their doctor's office. Okay, well, let's go to the doctor's office and see if you can find it this time. All right, let's go to this grocery store that you like. Okay, now let's go back to the doctor's office. We like to see how you do getting where you need to go functionally. The DMV test does require 90-degree backing, so that parking maneuver where you have to back in, and parallel parking. Our program does not require this. It's just, most people don't end up doing those maneuvers functionally, so why do we force it? The DMV test is free, but if you fail it, you will have your license lost and you'd have to have a permit and go through the process to get it back again, possibly. Our program does have a cost, but we do find ways to try to restrict driving if it's safe. And honestly, a lot of people do great when they're in their familiar environment and they're comfortable. Can I be tested if my license is canceled? Yes. If we do the testing in the clinic and we find that we do need to do that behind the wheel evaluation, we can get a letter sent to the state to ask for a limited license, or we can ask for it to be reinstated. Sorry, I did that in opposite order. So we can get your license reinstated if the doctor's comfortable with that. Otherwise, we can get a limited license to go drive. Something that I see a lot on behind the wheel is slowing down too much to keep up with traffic flow. I noticed that when people have a harder time processing information quickly. So, if you are riding with someone, let's say, and you're wondering if they're still safe to drive, these are some things to watch for. Slowing down too much to keep up with traffic flow. Self-distracting, pointing things out that are not relevant, looking at dogs on the side of the road when things are important right in front. Not planning lane changes ahead. Oh my goodness, I have so many times where someone makes a very sudden decision. They realize their turn is coming up and they get over there really quick. And that's risky. There's rules in Minnesota that say you really need to make a lane change and signal it ahead of time. And who knows who's behind you when you're about to make that sudden decision. So very risky. Not scanning enough in parking lots. Parking lots are kind of a weird no man's land. No one really knows what the rules are, but you do still need to stay on kind of the right side of, a throughway, a lane. And you do need to be extra attentive, watching out for pedestrians, bicyclists, drivers going kind of cattywampus throughout all the parking spaces. It's just visual scanning is very, very important. You shouldn't be looking just straight ahead. Forgetting navigation. Sometimes people will miss a turn, but then can they self-correct? Do they know an alternative way to get there? Because I miss turns sometimes, but I don't necessarily have a problem with driving, but can I self-correct and fix my route? If someone says they rely heavily on GPS, I will let them use their GPS, but then I want to make sure that they can actually use it. And I also warn about, hey, what if your phone doesn't work that day? Then what do you do? So I don't like it when GPS is heavily relied on, but then it's not very consistent to be able to use for the person to be able to use it. Forgetting the rules. At roundabouts, this happens. I've had a few situations where we'll get to a roundabout and someone will be upset that no one's letting them in. And I'll say, well, you are the one that's yielding. The person in the roundabout needs to keep going because that's how the traffic rules work. Otherwise, things wouldn't happen and there'd be more accidents. So things about roundabouts. two left turn lanes. I see this a lot where there's two lanes that are both turning left, and someone will start in one lane and then cross over into the other lane in the middle of the intersection. Being extra aware of which lane you're supposed to be in and where you're going to be ending is important. Using the turn signal consistently, of course, those are kind of bad habits that people tend to get over time. Is I don't need to use it as often, so I'm not going to. I just say keep using it consistently so that you don't have to think about it. Remembering that you should stop for pedestrians that are waiting on the side of the road. Even if it's an unmarked crosswalk, they do technically have the right of way. So if you can give them room and you can stop in time for them to go across, that's a good idea. All right, let's talk about driving retirement now. How do we talk with loved ones about it? I think ideally it's about normalizing that that plan coming up and planning early on for it. So talking about it even before it becomes a concern. You know, I've already mentioned this to my husband, and he's like, yeah, just tell me if it starts to be something we have to start thinking about. It's like, as long as your mind is going toward that eventuality, and you don't just think, I'm going to drive until the day I die. It's just important to have that conversation. The Hartfords at the Crossroads and We Need to Talk are really great resources. You can get them at that link there. You can also just Google Hartford at the Crossroads, and it's a nice big document that you can download, and it has some good ways to kind of initiate that conversation. It's never too soon, as I said, to plan or consider places that would be easiest to live when you're not driving. Would you need to move to a place that's closer to family, a certain family member that has more availability? Is it better to move to a place where I would have alternative transportation available more easily? Let's say you live out in the country where there's really not a lot of options. Maybe you need to move inward a little bit toward the suburbs. Home services, organizations around, those are some really good ones there. More resources here. The Hartford.com has a lot more publications on planning for driving retirement and aging in place too. Let's see here. Oh yeah, this brightfocus.org Alzheimer's article about retiring driving is good too. Considering your safety alone in the community as well. If someone has cognitive changes, I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to just get a ride somewhere and be dropped off. Because if you're at a doctor's office, you should probably have someone there to hear what the doctor has to say and to help remember. It's a vulnerable adult situation. You want to make sure you're not in the community alone necessarily. I think it's a great idea to have a regular time for a certain family member or a friend to come over and spend time with you. Or, all right, this is our day. They pick me up and we go bowling, or we just go get coffee, or we go for a walk, so that we're not feeling really isolated when we retire from driving. Is it time to move to a senior apartment with services? There's so many of those around now. There's more and more popping up all the time. And senior apartments can have a huge variety of services. Just look around for what appeals to you, and it really helps to do a tour. Could a regular personal care assistant be helpful? If you want to stay at home and you can't drive anymore, maybe a PCA could be someone that picks you up and gets you to go out places, get your groceries, and then take care of some stuff at home. A couple of my favorite websites for finding a good living situation is carepatrol.com. Frances Zelch is the case manager, I guess, for the east side of the Twin Cities. But you can just go onto carepatrol.com and connect with anyone, and they'll connect you with whoever the right person is for your area. LAH Network stands for Living at Home Network, and that has a lot of resources on it as well. So you can find resources for where to move to for services, and there are also services that could come to your home. Just depends on what's available in your area. More resources to explore. So looking at churches with volunteer drivers, at least to get you to church and back, if that's important to you. A lot of them will also do medical rides. Nonprofit neighborhood programs like the Living at Home Network I mentioned. Your county website, minnesotahelp.info, is a really good website too. Some people use smartphone-based apps like Uber or Lyft to get places, and that's a good option for sure. But if you're not very comfortable with smartphones, Go Grandparent is a really cool thing. You just call that number. They also have a website you can get registered on, but you can call. Oh, there goes my light. Sorry, I'm in a room with automatic lights and I wasn't in front of it enough. So you can call that number and they can get you set up with a ride using one of those app-based services, but you don't have to have a smartphone. And then Metro Mobility, I know many of you have probably heard of that and how it's a little slower. You know, it has to pick up a lot of people on the way. In fact, I think I'll talk about that next. Here we go. Um, I'll explain more about that, but it does take an application. It looks kind of big and cumbersome, but the patient or the person using it and or their family or care partners fill out the first part, and then a medical professional, someone that knows them well enough, fills out the second part. It could be an OT, PT, a doctor, psychologist. I think it could be any of those. And then you send it all in at once. There's the link for the form if you need it. Once you're accepted, the rider can have one person with them for free. So I recommend this for, you know, maybe couples where one of the people in the couple don't like driving at baseline, and then the other one now can't drive. So what do? Well, one of them can get Metro Mobility, and then they can ride together. One-way ride is $3.50 to $4.50. I think that depends on if it's rush hour or not. It does have limitations, as you probably heard. You know, you don't want to use Metro Mobility if you are so vulnerable that being dropped off somewhere is too risky for you and you need to be with someone. They do pick up and drop off other riders on the way, so it's not a very direct route. And they do need to be scheduled in advance. However, there is a premium same-day service. So if you apply for Metro Mobility, you can also do this same-day service where it's, you know, more spontaneous scheduling, a more direct route. It just costs a little bit more. So that's all on the Metro Mobility website. You can find out more information. So just some concluding thoughts I wanted to kind of end with here. It just can be so difficult to know when it's really time to retire from driving. Too soon and you might get isolated. Maybe you do still have the skills to drive certain places or within restrictions. But if you go too long and you're at more of a risk of an accident or making a big mistake like missing an exit and ending up, you know, a state or two away, that's really scary. So kind of finding that middle ground, having conversations early on is a great way to determine when that time will be to retire from driving, or it helps get that thought process started so it's not just a shock. And this is kind of a weird term, but therapeutic fibbing. You know, if someone has cognitive changes and they just can't reason, it is okay to use some therapeutic fibbing that actually helps make the situation better and calms things down when the person really can't reason well. Basically, it's as simple as, oh, my car isn't working. I want to be able to go out and drive. Well, we'll make sure we get that in right away. Or, yep, we've got it scheduled for Monday. Even if it's not, it's okay just to kind of get that conversation kind of distracted a little bit if that person shouldn't be driving anymore. It is possible too to hide the keys, remove or disable the car if that person doesn't know their own limits. And just know that the behaviors do not reflect who the person is. This is the brain changes that are happening, and it's hard to see that personality or that person changing, but just know that it's not really who they are. Yeah. So anyway, I hope this conversation was really helpful. I welcome any questions you have. Here's our fax number if referrals need to be sent. If you have doctors within Health Partners, they can just put in the order and then I think it goes right to our scheduling people anyway. If there are questions about this too later on, feel free to call this phone number.